The Center for Popular Democracy Action presents the Fight Back Fireside Chat with Ganesh Sitaraman, author of The Public Option, in conversation with Natalia Salgado and Jennifer Flynn Walker.
I watched you give a talk, and you were like, "Don't be shy."
Yeah,
and then,
people should just come on in.
But then people were shy,
Yeah,
and we're just going to be shy.
Yeah,
So
it's okay.
I took your joke. Sorry. So welcome to the Center for Popular Democracy's Fight Back Fireside Chat. My name is Jennifer Flynn Walker, and rather than giving you a meaningless title, I spend a lot of time here trying to think about what we should do to stop the threat of authoritarianism in our country by increasing the public's participation in our democracy. So in other words, I attempt to make democracy popular, hence the name, and I plan a lot of protests. So this series actually started as a way for thinkers to tell doers what to do to save the country. Now I know everyone's getting all like huffy, you're both a thinker and you're a doer, but like every day I go to work trying to like do things. Mostly I schedule calls, but I do something, and some people get to go to work and like read a lot and write a lot. So I'm gonna put some people in the more doer and more thinker category. So we're very excited to have a thinker here with us, Professor Ganesh Sitaraman. He's here to talk about his latest book, The Public Option: How to Expand Freedom, Increase Opportunity, and Promote Equality. I'll probably try to get him to talk about his other book, because I actually read that earlier and think about it a lot. The Crisis of the Middle Class Constitution, Why Economic Inequality Threatens Our Republic, and the Counterinsurgents Constitution, Law in the Age of Small Wars. He's got a super impressive overachiever's resume. He's the Chancellor's Faculty Fellow, a Professor of Law, and Director of Program on Law and Government at Vanderbilt Law School. Probably most important for many of you, he worked for Senator Warren, and he is a policy advisor to Senator Warren. So if you like that she's got a plan for that, he maybe suggested the plan. So we're very excited to talk to him about that. My favorite fact about him is that he's an Eagle Scout, and I kind of just wish we had like an hour to talk about that. But let me introduce Natalia Salgado. She's CPD's political director and chief of civic engagement. She comes to CPD after a bunch of years working for the New York State Attorney General's office. And before that, she worked at SEIU, Local 32BJ, as the New York State Deputy Political Director and the Pennsylvania Political Director. And Natalia, were you an Eagle Scout?
No, but I'm from Philly, so I'm a huge Eagles fan, but I have a feeling why not.
It's not quite the same.
So
Go Birds.
Well, I was a Brownie, which is the first stage of being a Girl Scout for anyone who doesn't know. But I quit in protest because I felt like they were authoritarian and didn't let me have my freedom. So I feel like that really sets us up for what we're going to talk about today. So Professor Sitaraman, did you see the protest where a lot of people got arrested for Save the Affordable Care Act, or a lot of people got arrested or yelled at, where is Ana Maria, yelled at Senator Jeff Flake in the elevators to protest the confirmation, or to try to stop the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh? Mm-hmm. So that was us. And I had a role in like planning that. And I've got a bunch of people, and all of us in this room have a bunch of people who will basically show up and do something. So when you saw those on TV, did you want to shake your hand at us, fist in the air, and say, "Oh, I wish you were doing something else"? And if so, what should we be doing? What would you want to tell us to do better?
So I wasn't shaking my fist as you shouldn't be doing that. I actually think it's great that you're doing that. And that's how change happens, is partly you have to have people who are on the outside pushing, mobilizing, building pressure, building power at the grassroots level. And partly you have to have people on the inside who can work the halls of Congress, know all the details of the policies, make the compromises, do what needs to be done. But these two things work together. I mean, there's an inside game and an outside game. And I think you don't have a robust outside game if you don't have the pressure, if you don't have people mobilized actually demanding change, you're not going to get it. And that's one of the most important pieces, I think, of, in most of the books, there's some component that I've written, there's some component of thinking through how the work of what people in a democracy do. And that's not just about voting. It's not just about intellectuals writing things or, letters to the editor. It's all of those things, but it's also, protesting. It's also organizing. It's also being out in the streets. It's also mobilizing people to be active in their communities or to be active on campaigns or to be active on issues. I think it's, I have no objection. In fact, think it's awesome and would celebrate it. I think it's a critical part of how we run a democracy in this country.
Thank you. So we were just in Detroit. I don't know if you know that, but we had what's called a People's Convention, and we had 1,600 activists from 55 affiliates across 35 states come into Detroit and talk about all the sort of things that need to change in this country and putting together more protests and rallies to enact that change. Detroit is also the home of the very sort of famous Treaty of Detroit. And it's this sort of amazing example of how government and the private sector came together to put together this incredible agreement that allowed auto workers to be ushered into the middle class. And I know it's something you mentioned in the public option, right? So what do you think? Like, how do we persuade people that the public option is not socialism, right? Like, how do we get them to think about this in a broader way?
So let me,
and just for our viewers who like socialism, you can also still continue to believe that it's socialism, but explain why it's not.
Yeah, so let me step back for a second on both of those points. And as you can see, the book is right here. I encourage you to purchase it at your local neighborhood bookstore or on the internet. But the basic argument in the book is that we've gone through different eras and how we've thought about providing basic social goods to people in our society. From the 40s through the 70s, the model we talked about is the Treaty of Detroit. The basic idea is we have employer-based benefits. The theory was for a lot of people, you'd work at a big company, you get your healthcare through the company, you get retirement pensions through the company. And that was the model. And it was very different than other models. In Europe, for example, there was national health insurance in a lot of places. That was not the route the United States took in that period. We then went through a neoliberal era from the 80s really till the present. And in that era, the basic theory was we're going to provide social goods through the market. And employers started cutting back, started shifting risks onto workers and individuals instead of providing. So the best example there is a lot of people used to have defined benefit pensions. Now a lot of people just get to contribute into a 401k and they take all the risk of stock market going up or down. Big difference. And that era, this kind of market era went on for a while. And even that era now has a lot of problems. We have a big financial crash. We have highest levels of inequality in a century. It hasn't really worked for us. And so what our argument in the book is that we can actually have a public option, government provision of social goods, with a private opt-out. And this is something we've really had throughout American history in lots of areas. It's not just unique to healthcare, where the public option versus Medicare for all gets debated quite a bit. If you think about it, we have public options everywhere in our society. There are public swimming pools. Some people have private swimming pools. We have public libraries. If you're here in New York, Columbia University has a private library. If you think about public golf courses, Donald Trump owns a lot of private golf courses, but there's public basketball courts and private basketball courts, public schools and private schools. And a lot of these things have existed for hundreds of years, and they're deeply American. So if you have an objection to the post office versus UPS and FedEx, you should take that up with the founders, because the post office is in the text of the Constitution. If you have a problem with libraries, Ben Franklin was the champion of the library tradition in America at the very beginning. And we've obviously had public schools and swimming pools since the 19th century. So, there's a lot of these things that have been around for a long time. It's not a kind of newfangled radical idea. The idea that we, the public, should offer the basic goods that allow everyone to flourish in our society is something we've had for a long time.
Yeah, if it's okay to have a follow-up question, I think it's so frustrating, and that was a great way to put it. I think one of the things that people worry about is like, what are they going to have to invest in order, like, is it going to be higher taxes? What is it going to mean for them in their pocketbooks? Like, I don't know if you have thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important about public options is there's the benefit side and then there's the financing side. So on the benefit side, we want to think about what's the good that people need. Is there a really core moral thing at issue? Is there a really important economic opportunity question? And so we might want to provide, is there a market failure, right? So we might want to provide the goods for those reasons. How we do the financing, though, can depend based on the different things we're talking about. So, if you take Social Security, which is a kind of baseline public option for a pension, workers pay in throughout their lives. If you take something like a public library, we have taxes and donations, that kind of thing for it. Everyone pays 50 cents when you mail a letter. So there's a component of paying. If you go to the public beach, you're going to have to pay a per car fee usually for spending the day there. So, and there's also taxpayer money that contributes to that and other things. And so, we organize these in different ways. And so I don't think we should be afraid of this, because we pay, whether it's property taxes for schools or fees or regular taxes for lots of different things. And it turns out they're great for our society, because public schools mean we have an educated workforce, and that drives our economy. It means that there's creative people who can be innovators everywhere. Public transit, there's a private option of having your own car, but public transit for a lot of people means you can live in lots of different places, and it's still affordable to get to work. It's also good for the environment and not have as many carbon emissions out there. So there's a lot of things like this, and I don't think we should be afraid of paying for them, because there are lots of different ways to pay for them.
Thank you.
I love the way that I'm totally with you in the book when you're like talking about how the market fails us. Do you want to explain a little bit about some of the ways that the free market, we have a kind of, you call it a romance. I'd say it's a bad romance with the market. Thanks.
You can
Thank
see
you
it.
for that. Thank you.
I mean, it's a great song. So I'm not sure if I can get Lady Gaga to blurb like the next book or something, but that would be helpful.
Yeah. Can we tweet her right now?
So, our romance with free markets. I think part of the challenge that's happened is in the neoliberal era, the thought is we're going to provide all these social goods, and the best way to do that is through the market mechanism. Yeah. And if we need help, if people need help, the way we should do that is we should leave it to the market, and maybe we can throw in some subsidies, we can throw in some tax credits, but largely let's keep it to the market. The problem is that in lots of areas, markets don't really work that well for us. In some places they do, but markets can also be extremely concentrated, dominated by a small number of companies, even approaching monopoly, which may mean higher prices, worse quality, and lots of pressure on people that can also lock out competition. In other places, there are people who are trying to take advantage of people in the market. And so you get deliberately fraudulent actions and so on that can happen. Risky products, often targeted at the most vulnerable people. And you see that, in the lead up to the financial crash, for example, lots of risky mortgages and financial products that helped cause the big crash. And that's a problem for markets. We also have market problems with the answers, with things like subsidies and tax credits. Often these kinds of things don't work very well. It's really hard to do a tax credit. You have to think about it at tax time. It's very complicated for people to figure that stuff out. You have to remember to take it. And even regular subsidies can actually increase prices rather than decrease prices, because the fact is, when you're subsidizing something like higher education, for example, the schools can choose to increase the prices even higher than they had before. And because you're getting the subsidy, you still feel like you're getting a little bit of a discount, a coupon, but the coupon's now on a higher price. So it's not obvious in all cases that markets work great. There's a lot of problems in these areas. One of the benefits of the public option is you can have a simple, workable approach that doesn't have any of the tricks and traps that you might have in the marketplace. Is pretty straightforward and easy to use instead of being really complicated. And it can actually create new competition. because the public option will compete with private options in the marketplace, and that's better for both.
You quote Trump in your book, which probably very few law professors do actually, but by saying that healthcare is really complicated. And so one of the things that I try to do, I know, who knew? I try to run the Medicare for All campaign here at CPD, just so you know a little bit about the Center for Popular Democracy. You know, our predecessor organization, kind of part of our DNA is a lot of our groups were ACORN chapters. And they were very involved in winning the Affordable Care Act. They were a member of Healthcare for America Now, and they obviously were pushing for the public option, which we ultimately lost. And so, you know, right now there's kind of a real struggle in healthcare that is it possible that any role for the free market, is there any role for a profit-driven healthcare industry? Or what I would say is, does it have to be entirely situated in the government? And so I just want you to talk a little bit about, you know, the role for private insurance companies. Do we need them? Do we need a public option, or can we go all the way?
So in the book, what we try to do is outline a variety of options and ways to think about how you would design a public option. And where I'll start is that there's two ways to think about a public option. The first is what we call a competitive public option. And that's just a fancy way of saying that there are some public options where you have to choose between the private and the public one. So for example, if you're mailing a package, you can't literally mail the exact same package using UPS and the Postal Service at the exact same time. Like, you got to pick one, and then they're in competition with each other. In other places, like Social Security, we'd call that a baseline public option, provides a public provision of something to everybody. But in addition to getting your money from Social Security when you retire, you can also have a private pension. You could also save your own money. You can also have 401k. There's lots of other options that you can have involved that are private on top of the baseline. So in the debate on healthcare, one of the things that's interesting is we see the whole range of how we might think about public and private going on in this debate. On the one hand, there are people who say we should just have a public option. It could operate on all the state exchanges. You could imagine having a national health insurance exchange and having a public option operate on that as well that people would buy into. That could be Medicare, it could be Medicaid. You could also imagine a single payer system, and those have different designs. So some people have suggested a single payer system like Medicare for all, that they would call Medicare for all, but it would still have other options on top of it. And currently Medicare, for example, people take out supplemental insurance. Medigap coverage is a private insurance that exists on top of current Medicare. So if you were to do Medicare for all built on the current Medicare, you would still have some of that. There are other options for Medicare that go farther than that and say we should just have exclusive public provision and not have any private provision on the health insurance front. And then I'll pause and say there's actually even a broader thing. We're just talking about health insurance. But why is that the right place, we might think? One of the challenges with all public options is, what's the thing we're talking about? Is it really health insurance? Or is a public option in health care mean public hospitals and doctors who work for the public? How do we decide what the level of provision is, whether it's insurance or something else? So in fact, when we think about healthcare, most people I think who are pushing for Medicare for all have actually not taken a position of we should have public hospitals with doctors who work for the public and so on. It's actually a very different position. It's just health insurance that should be a public, either single payer direct provision or a public option. But you know, there are a lot of different ways we could think about that. When you look at the VA offers care. That is a different model of public provision. So there's a real variety here. And I think our position in the book is to really try to lay out what the range of options is, because there's so many different ways you could design this particular structure.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Professor,
that was very professor answer. Very professor.
Can I just tell you, every time I say it, I feel like I'm making a cameo on Gilligan's Island. Like, who am I, Mrs. Howell? Probably. To the millennials.
At least I'm not Gilligan.
Yeah,
so
Gilligan's Island was a show in the 80s or 70s. So what do you think? Like, are there examples of where, maybe not this, obviously this specific model, or else we'd all move there, but like chunks of what you're saying, are there models across the world that you think are like models that we should be looking at?
Well, I'll give you some models in different sectors, even in America. So we'll touch on a couple areas. So you want different part of the world, we can talk about childcare. So huge problem for people in the country. In many states, the cost of childcare is more than the cost of sending a kid to college for a year. I mean, that's an extraordinarily high burden. And that's a challenge for kids, it's a challenge for parents, it's a challenge for employers. So all around, it's a big problem. So in France, they have a childcare system where from very, very early on, kids can go and they have childcare at infant care level, and then it moves into pre-K, and then the public school system takes over. We could imagine creating a public option in childcare that would help do that. And there's different ways you can think about structuring that. I think you probably want to build some of it on top of our existing school system. So maybe start with pre-K and work your way backwards, get younger and younger might be one way, but there are lots of other ways you can think about it. But that's a place where, in a different country, we have a model for this. Another place where there's a public option that I think is really extraordinary is broadband internet. So in Chattanooga, they have a public option for broadband. It provides 1 gig download speeds service. So that is super fast internet at an affordable price. It's a city of 180,000 people, and they've got something like 100,000 customers, and they've been doing this for years now. And it's a public option. It competes with private internet companies, your Comcasts and AT&Ts, and it provides amazing service. And what Chattanooga has seen as a result is businesses are doing better. They have more engagement locally in their economy because they have this very, very affordable, extremely fast internet. And right now, if you think about where we have a patchwork of opportunity in the country, in rural places, something like a quarter of rural America doesn't even have 25 meg download speeds, which is like not very fast. That's a quarter of rural America that doesn't have it. If you think about high speed, 100 megabyte download speeds, something like 85% of the country either has 0 options or only 1 option. So that means a monopoly or a no option. So this is a place where a public option can create real competition and actually help spur more competition in the market and make things better. So I think those are a couple examples where we have tested systems and seen it work in places, and we should be thinking about doing more. And broadband is a local option. When we talk about healthcare, we're often thinking national. So these things can exist at every level of government, local, state, national. And they're the kind of thing that people if you're an activist in a city, you can push for that. If you're an activist in a state house, you can push for that. It doesn't have to be federal policy in all these cases. Public options can happen at the local level too.
So just thinking about the sort of political environment that we're in, and President Trump's sort of tweets about AOC as a socialist and calling other folks, sort of the new Democrats in the House, as socialists, and using that as a way to create some animosity towards them. Do you think we're ready for this? Do you think we're ready for a public option in this country, given the sort of political environment that we're in?
So I think we're ready for big changes in lots of areas. And part of the reason is, this is something I wrote about in the other book you mentioned, The Crisis of the Middle Class Constitution. We have century-level high inequality at this point. People see that they've been struggling in terms of their wages, benefits, opportunities for a generation. And that creates a lot of pressure for people to want change. And I think the other thing that people really see is that Washington isn't helping in a lot of ways. And so when you look at a variety of these things, take the broadband public option, for example, that's extremely popular. When you poll Democrats, Republicans, Independents, it's extremely popular. And it's because everybody understands that this is a great benefit to them as individuals at home. It's a great benefit to the economy. It's a great thing that we can do. It's kind of basic infrastructure for the modern age, like electricity was, 100 years ago, and we should have that everywhere in this country. So I think a lot of these things are really popular, and what it takes, again, to go back to where we started, is it takes people really pushing hard for that, and forcing the people in power to be responsive.
I'm actually, broadband's really popular. I'm actually shocked that as someone who is sitting next to 2 people who look very young, I actually have to care about retirement soon, and I'm shocked that people aren't more outraged that they are going to outlive their money. I'm gonna have to work till I'm like 95 years old or whatever, and you know, I mean, hope out loud that I don't actually live that long. But you know, like I'm gonna have to work because I know that I'm not gonna have enough money, you know, to survive another 5 years past when I stop. And so I know that you talk about the idea of, you know, a public option for something like pensions, and then of course we know that it's very popular, or that people are talking about student debt. I just read an article today. Actually, that's a lie. I didn't read an article. I was on the internet, probably like Facebook, and I saw a headline and did not actually click to open it, but the headline said that, and I'm just gonna repeat it as if it's a fact, that in Texas, that actually I did read a little bit, for for-profit, for the people who have student debt, they're allowed to hire US Marshals, and that US Marshals moved to arrest someone who had, you know, student debt, outstanding student debt, and that he actually had to pay his student debt in order to be released. And so student debt's obviously a huge crisis. Talk to us a little bit, you know, to the always voters about retirement, and to the new millennial voters or never voters yet about free college.
Yeah, so, you know, two big problems. Retirement, you know, we have a major retirement crisis, and you talked about it, I think very well. People feel like they're going to have to work forever, are not saving enough at all. And part of the reason is we've had a breakdown in kind of theory of how we thought we were going to be able to make retirement work for many years, which was that people would have Social Security, a pension from their employer, and then some private savings. And basically, there are problems in all three of these buckets. As I said earlier, a lot of the pensions no longer exist. A lot of employers don't have pensions. They do. They've moved from defined benefit pensions to contribution pensions. A lot of people aren't able to save enough because if you don't have any money, it's hard to save money for retirement when you just need to put food on the table, cover childcare, or any of these other costs. And then on the Social Security side, you know, Social Security is not enough money to live on. It wasn't meant to fully replace a salary at the levels that people live today. So there are reforms in all of these. I think two that get talked about a lot are, one, can we expand Social Security? You know, this is a kind of baseline public option for a pension. And there's been talk about that in Congress, and there's a lot of people who are interested in that. And I think that's a very promising way to expand an existing baseline public option. The other one is there are a lot of people who are in jobs where their employer doesn't offer a 401k or any of these advantaged or just kind of easy to access retirement services. And there are actually ones that exist right now in the public space. So government employees have one called the TSP. And we can imagine, and we talk about in the book, the idea of expanding that as a kind of public option for everyone, a TSP for all. You can join into it if you want to, so that if you're a worker who doesn't have an investment opportunity in the same way through your employer, you can loop in through the TSP. And one of the benefits of it is it has extremely low fees for investing, and it has a simple set of investment opportunities for people. So it's not as complicated as having to choose between every stock and every mutual fund, which is a limited set of options, including life cycle funds with the targeted retirement date. And it's, you know, understood to be a pretty good place to go. So I think those are a couple options on how we could think about retirement to start making progress. Now, it's not going to solve all the problems. The fact is, if we don't do things about wages and rebalancing the economy in the first place, you know, that's a much bigger problem. But these are some ways that we can try to make progress. On the student debt side, you know, I don't think it's just a young person issue. There's a lot of young people who have student debt. There's a lot of middle-aged people who have student debt. There's a lot of older people who have student debt. We have more than $1 trillion, so something like $1.5 trillion now in outstanding student debt, and it's crippling individuals, families, the economy. I mean, it's bad all around. And part of the problem is we've basically just had a failed experiment in the theory that we were going to try to do higher education funding through a system of loans and subsidies. That's what the subsidized loan system is, and it's been really hard for people with public loans, private loans, and this has meant a lot of student debt, and it's caused all these problems. I think one of the benefits of a public option for college, which we think of as free public colleges, free college, is that we need to understand now that just like a long time ago, we decided K-12 education was really important. So we're going to have it. It's going to be free for everybody to go to public school. that we now need some kind of training, some kind of education after high school. It might be 2-year, might be 4-year, might be being apprentice, might be something else, but people need some additional training and education, and we should make that free too. And that's the basic idea of free college. And I think that's another opportunity. And for anyone coming up, if you were to be able to do that, go to a public university, public college, public community college for free, you then don't have this student debt problem. And that's good for individuals, it's good for their families, it's good for the economy, it's good for everybody in the system. So, I think those are two places that can really help a lot of people. And they're a framework that is basically a public option, a baseline public option, Social Security, and a private competitive public option for something like a 401k for everyone. And similarly, free college is a public option. It's not stopping anyone from sending their kid to Vanderbilt or Harvard or whatever, but if we had free options for a lot of people, I think people would use it.
I've spent the last week in New Jersey. I feel like I need to apologize. Yeah, no, New Jersey is fine. And it's because my sister is dying. Don't be sad. Don't feel bad. She was dying a few Fight Back Fireside Chats ago, so it's been a while. She's coming up on the end of her Medicaid-funded 6 months of in-home hospice. And so it's very lucky that she got pneumonia and sepsis and now got to go to the emergency room, because otherwise we would have had to pay for the in-home hospice ourselves until we could reset and be, it can be $100,000 like within 5 months. It's like a crazy amount of money. So, I just wanted to say, if there was a presidential candidate who had all of your policy ideas and wanted to put them forward, but some people thought that they were socialist, just make a very clear pitch about, the role of the private market and how it's good for business. And then I'm going to get back to my dying sister, so you don't have to comment on that.
Sorry, you want me to make a pitch for what?
Yeah, a pitch for how if there was a presidential candidate who had a lot of ideas of, following the prescription in your book,
Yeah.
a public option for broadband, for, supporting Medicare for all, just, how it's not quite socialism. I know that you've said this a little bit, but just really clearly that there is a role for business, and it's actually good for business, and you say this. I'm quoting you.
Yeah. So I'll just start by making clear also that I'm not speaking for any candidate or candidates, and I'm not here in any capacity, just professorially here today. So that's the only capacity in which I can speak. But I do think that having public provision in these areas should be something that people in business should be excited about. And the reason why they should be excited is these basic foundational things are good for the economy, and they're actually good for capitalism. And I'll give you a few examples we've talked about a bunch of examples, but if you take healthcare, when people are sick, they can't go to work. If you're a company, you should want your people to be healthy. It would be good for them to all have healthcare. It would be good for them to have a robust and good healthcare system, and that's good if you're a small business. It's good if you're a big business. When you think about retirement, for people to feel like they are secure in their retirement and not have that anxiety is good for businesses also. And if we use some examples we haven't talked about, a public option for research and development. We have public spending on scientific research, healthcare research, medical research. All of this is a public option. There's also private sector spending on research. It's really good we have the public sector stuff. Public sector stuff is different than private spending. It's often more basic science. It often creates breakthroughs that we have no idea what's going to come out of them decades in advance. And if you think about the things that the government spent a lot of money on in research, it's space program, which created hundreds of innovations in lots of different areas. It's basic science research that led to the internet. The Defense Department started that stuff. And think about how many jobs, parts of our lives have been fully transformed by the internet, which starts as government-funded research. So I think people who are in business, people who are pure capitalists, should be excited about public options in a lot of these areas, because they do actually help even businesses whether it's with their workers, whether it's with creating innovation. And all of that is good for our economy. It's good for them. It's good for everyone. So in a way, a lot of public action in these areas, and this has been true for hundreds of years, is a win for a lot of people. It's not something that's in opposition.
It's good for businesses, and it's also really good for people's lives. I mean, this stuff matters that you write about in the book. And, I gave the example of, this really heart-wrenching example, personal example of healthcare. I want everyone right now to take out their phones. Everyone in here, take out your phones. Call your Congress member right now, 202.
Use my phone.
225.
Mrs. House phone.
3121 is your House member. It doesn't matter. Just, they'll ask you who you're say anybody. And just tell them that you would like them to support Medicare for all. And I do want to open it up for questions in the room. So I know some people are still on the phone, but you can ask the questions.
The heckler go first.
Okay.
So first of all, thank you so much. I feel like you make a very persuasive case. It strikes me that it's a fairly modest proposal in some ways, and modest not in terms of the amount of change it would be. It's a pretty modest proposal that makes me want to push further or ask, do we need a private option? Like, what's the value of a private option? And because when the public option works well, roads, we mostly don't have private roads. There are some exceptions, but it's, so what is it what's the value of a private option? And what are the places where there's a tension between a private option? Because in some ways you're saying, look, it can work. We have a public basketball court. You have a private basketball. It's all good. Everyone wins. I feel persuaded by that. But I am curious if there are times and places where having a private system can subvert or make more challenging the public system, where it coexists. So it's really two questions.
Yeah, so that's great. And part of the goal of the book was to really flesh out this tool of the public option as a specific tool when there's really a wide continuum that we often don't think about between public and private. So, in the casual debate, you're either in favor of private and markets, or everything is government and socialism, and it seems like there's nothing in the middle, when in fact there's lots of different things, and we almost never have pure government or pure private. I mean, there's a few places, but in most places there's regulations, that's a constraint on private. There is subsidies or tax systems that shape incentives in the private sector. We have public utilities in some places. We have outsourcing to private. We have contractors. So there's a wide range in how we can think about public and private. So let me just pick a couple of examples that I think get at what you're talking about. So one example is what's a reason why in some areas we might want markets. And one is, markets can provide a lot of competition, which can spur a lot of innovation. So there are sectors where we want a lot of innovation, and competition is good for that. We get new products, we get new ideas, we get people who are interested in doing that. And that is one of the places where markets are really good for people finding places where it's not the thing you need, it's the thing you don't even know that you want, but someone has an idea and can help bring that forward. And so I think there's a place for competition to help spur innovation. And that's a place where markets are often very, very useful and very good. Another area, though, that we might think about to get to your second point, justifications on where there can be real problems where you might not want markets. So there are entire sectors that we think of and have thought of historically as ill-suited to markets because we want them to be a monopoly. It's a natural monopoly, it's an infrastructure good, it's a network industry. And these are places where you can't really have effective competition because you need there to be a monopoly so that everybody is in the same structure or system. So when we think about an electric utility or sewers or plumbing, these are kind of old classic examples of utilities. You don't want 12 different types of pipes all coming doing the same thing, all put out by different companies. you need one set of pipes or one set of electric power lines. And in fact, the cost of setting up all the infrastructure for all of these different things would be very, very high, highly capital intensive. And so there are problems with that. And so it's all in broad strokes, obviously, but in that context, our answer was we should have some sectors that are public utilities, which are basically monopolies, and they're heavily regulated, and they have a bunch of requirements around them. So universal service, you have to provide everybody with electricity. And if somebody out there, some enterprising middle manager said, actually, it's very expensive to bring the electricity to that neighborhood because they're farther away, let's just stop it. They're not allowed to do that. They have to serve everyone. That's part of the idea, universal service. Non-discrimination, everybody's gonna pay regulated rates. We're not gonna charge different. Pricing is cross-subsidized so that it's affordable for everybody rather than charging marginal cost pricing, which might be really cheap if you're in a tight area, really expensive in other places. And then we don't allow competition in those areas. It's a protected franchise. So there's places where we've done this for a long time. You actually can't create competition with the post office for the regular 50-cent mail that goes every day. There's a monopoly over part of that. And it's because we want to be able to send mail to the farthest parts away in Alaska if you live in New York City, in addition to being able to send it down the street. It turns out it's a lot more expensive to send it to Alaska. So we have built these systems where we want that. I think that's a place where there's a case for exclusive provision, and it has to be regulated. So there's a real big mix, and our focus is just on this one type between public and private, but I think there's a wide range, and in a lot of these areas, we should be thinking more about and fleshing out what's the case for them, what's the case against them, when are they powerful, when should we not use them, and how do we complement them with each other?
But we see cases where that's falling apart. I mean, I think water is. I remember being in graduate school a very long time ago where we said, well, the day that water is privatized, we'll all just, go live in like underground bunkers or something. And now, that's a common conversation. And we see places where, the public provision of water is fraught with lots of problems, lead poisoning. I mean, even here in New York, certainly in New Jersey, of course, Michigan. So, but, and the answer is always privatization. The answer is never like, let's up our investment, or we see libraries closing, or we see the postal service closing.
Yeah.
And we also see a real disillusion of the service. I mean, it's hard, it takes longer to mail the letter to, down the street, let alone to.
So this is part of our goal more broadly is, we've lived through an era of privatization for the last 30 years. The intuition has been we should privatize everything, leave it to the market, and so on. And the result is, major financial crash, largest inequality in 100 years, and a lot of problems at basic levels of the economy. And, it's not, purely causal, but there's a correlation between these things. And the broad model that we need to think about, I think, in our case, is to try to make the case for more public. It's not publicization, which is sort of a clunky word, but that we should be thinking more about reviving this tradition of really having public structures that are good. And the fact is that if you ask people love public libraries. And if you try to shut down the public park at the end of the street, the neighborhood will be very unhappy with that. People want these things because they're really good for our lives. And part of, I think, what we need to think about is really make the case for them, push to make them better. There's no reason why when you say, we have a problem with the pipes, that the answer is let's privatize the whole thing. Maybe the answer is we should have better pipes and we should replace them. And the public should be committed to doing that because it's a really good thing for all of us to have, good pipes that can get water, clean water to everyone in our society. And everyone should have that right to clean water in our society. That should be the case we're making.
So I totally agree with that, but I feel like we do say that. And at some point it does feel like, there's, I don't know, the corporate takeover of our government has gone too far, and like it's harder and harder for us to make inroads. I mean, we should have been able to have the pipe should have been fixed in Flint, Michigan, like 6 years ago, and we're just finding out that more and more and more pipes are, deteriorating and more kids are being poisoned. And so there's something that I feel like you need to yell at us and tell us what to do. And so, we're having a week of protest to welcome back Congress, and the theme is, Trump is a problem. our communities have the solutions. Like we would say, you need to fix the pipes, you need to reinvest in, clean water delivery. This is a public good. This is what we're all fighting for. It helps communities, it helps businesses, it, makes our economy and our democracy stronger. But we have, there's a mania, there is somebody who does not, is not beholden to any kind of structure of norms or, following laws that's running our country. And so we can't look to that person. We think that there's been a takeover of our court system, and I know you've thought a lot about this, so that we can't really, rely on the courts to hold it, in check and balance. So we're saying Congress must take action. They're sort of our last hope. So we're having this week of protest. We're going to talk about all of our things that we're fighting forward on, which I think are a lot of the public option. But what could we be doing better that could really carry forth the principles of the book? If we end up in 2021 with all of your policy prescriptions, I think that the world would be a better place. We'd actually save democracy. I think that we're losing our democracy. So yell at us.
Well,
Not me.
Not you, just her.
He does this
Yeah. So, I guess I'll not yell, but I think that
Yes.
I think that mobilizing and engaging people and organizing has to happen everywhere at all levels of government. So it's Congress, yes, but it's also state houses, it's city councils, it's at every level. And so it's something that anyone can do in their own community and be active on. But the second thing is that it's not just about the being opposed to things, it's about being for things. And so I think organizing and building towards something is really hard, but it's also really important. And I think that seeing that as part of our goals, I think, pushing forward what the affirmative vision is, I think is a really important piece of how we make progress as well. And so, part of our hope in the book was to help give people a little bit more of what the substance could be in some of these different areas, childcare and broadband and college, and others, and that would be a way for people to, here's some substance that we can actually build something around and try to organize around. And I think pushing people forward on that, and it's not just pushing, your friends, it's pushing and trying to persuade other people. It's both sides. It's mobilizing, everyone who already supports it, but it's also trying to persuade people who might be a little skeptical. And I think what's striking about that is, when you look back historically, and it's something I talk about in the Middle Class Constitution book, we've had major challenges as a country, and we've actually been able to make a lot of progress. I mean, the classic example I like to use from that book is our senators are directly elected by the people. That was not the way it was designed in the Constitution originally. State legislatures picked the senators. And the way that they had to fix that constitutional amendment, to get a constitutional amendment to change that, was they had to persuade the state legislatures, the very same people who had the power to pick the senators, to give up that power and let the people have it instead. Why would anyone want to give up their own power to get to pick the senators, especially when this is in the Gilded Age and progressive era, when there's a lot of corruption. You can, there's a great example in Montana of these kind of robber barons trying to buy the votes of state legislators so that they could become senator. When it's a lucrative business and you have power, why would they give that up? And the reason why they did it is because there was popular democracy. There was people who were organized, who were pushing, and who made it hard for them to not agree, to not give up that power because they were going to get voted out otherwise. And so I think that kind of mobilization and pushing is how we've gotten some pretty astonishing structural changes in even our Constitution over time. And so, I mean, that's the part that gives me hope in all of this, despite all the challenges. And it's the kind of thing where doesn't happen very quickly. I mean, in some of these cases, looking back historically, people work for years, in some cases decades, to get change. But it happens, and that's the kind of thing that should give us hope. Not the fantasy that we can do it, but the fact that we actually have done really big things. That means it is doable. It's proof that we can do it.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you're so hopeful. We'll do our best. We're going to call you up, and when we're doing something, we're going to run it by you. And if you think it's utterly stupid, you'll tell us. I want to thank you for coming out to Bushwick, and thank you to Natalia for doing this.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you.
But I still like, everything you say in here is recorded. So whatever, watch what you
Just
say
tell us
right
all
now.
when we're off air.
Or we can just.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.